Hey everyone, Nathan here, Absurd Being, Levinas, Totality and Infinity. We are still in section 2, Interiority and Economy, and we are looking at the B subsection, Enjoyment and Representation today. So let's make a start with intentionality. So regarding intentionality, sorry, my throat is just not good today. Regarding intentionality, there are two aspects or two kinds of intentionality that Levinas talks about. The first is the intentionality of representation, which is what he associates with Husserl. And this type of intentionality is, the goal of this intentionality is to make the object intelligible. So it's to render it graspable, apprehensible to us, to our intellects. So that's the purpose of Husserl's intentionality. And what Levinas says is it reduces the object to its meaning. So he's going to suggest that it's stripping away a lot of the object as it is for us to kind of get to something that is a kind of like a core that maybe is fixed and universal, and that's what we're dealing with, right? The intellect. So we're trying to reduce, in a way, objects to this fixed core that we can intellectually grasp. And one consequence of this is that Levinas says it reduces the content thought to the same. The distinction between me and the object, between interior and exterior, is effaced without contradiction. Intelligibility, the very occurrence of representation, is the possibility for the other to be determined by the same without determining the same, without introducing alterity into it. It is the disappearance within the same of the I opposed to the non-I. Okay, so I think the big thing to take away from that is that the other, the object, is determined by the same, which is me, that totalizing relationship, without the other also determining me, without me being determined by the other at the same time. So that means that there's no alterity anymore in this picture. The other has completely lost its otherness for us. The object has completely lost its otherness. It's become completely absorbed by by the intentionality of representation, which is reducing that object, that other, to the same, to a totalized, bringing it into a totalizing relationship, which is how it's intelligible to me, because I'm reducing it to its meaning. I'm stripping away a whole lot of other stuff just to get to this core rational, intellectual meaning that I can grasp hold of. And in doing that, like I say, the otherness of the object disappears. So I quite like that section there. The other to be determined by the same without determining the same. So there's no sense that the object is playing an active role in this relation that I'm establishing with it. It doesn't do anything. I'm the driving force. I'm bringing it in I'm making it conform, if you like, to this totalizing relation that I'm establishing with it. So that means that the intentionality of representation is constitutive. So it constitutes the object. It makes the object in a way. It doesn't completely make it, of course. We're not creating anything, but we are ignoring that in the object which makes it the object which gives it its alterity. We're ignoring that and forcing the object into this relation with me, where it does nothing, it has nothing to give, where I impose my structures and like a framework on it, so that it fits, it conforms to my rationality. And when I do that, like I said, we lose the otherness. But so we have this aspect of Husserl's intentionality, which means that the I is constituting the object instead of perhaps apprehending it as it is. I'm forcing it to be something for me. And another consequence of this is that it exists in what Levinas calls the pure present. So there's any kind of sense of temporality is lost here, because the object is just its meaning, and its meaning is consistent and fixed and universal. So there's no sense, there's no history here. The object doesn't do anything. It's reduced to its meaning. So it's locked into this pure present. No future, no past. It has there's no space for temporality here. That's the first kind of the first kind of intentionality, representation. The second kind of intentionality is that of enjoyment. And here, as opposed to the intentionality of representation, which suspends exteriority, it gets rid of that exteriority, it gets rid of the otherness of the object. Enjoyment takes hold of it. And by that, Levinas means that enjoyment posits oneself in the midst of these objects, not as a determining factor, not as kind of something removed, detached from the things and reducing them to meanings, picking them out and giving them their sense. Instead of that, enjoyment throws us into the midst of these objects and is then, therefore, affected by them as well. And this is exactly what we've talked about with Levinas's idea of living from. That's exactly what that is. Taking hold of the things rather than forcing them into these kinds of, like, I guess maybe an intellectual mold, something that conforms to our reason, to our intellect. So representation reduces the object to its meaning. In living from, however, the intentionality of enjoyment, the object overflows its meaning, becomes within constitution the condition of the constituting, or more exactly, the nourishment of the constituting. And that's the exact opposite of what we saw before. The other, in representation, the other was determined by the same without determining the same at the same time. So it was kind of a one-way relation. But in enjoyment, the same determines the other while at the same time being determined by it. So there's an interplay there. There's a back and forth in which the object is not just this passive recipient of meaning which I bequeath to it. Instead, it's taking an active role, and in doing so, it's retaining a little bit of its otherness. It's not being completely, it is being absorbed into a totality, into a relation of sameness, but it's not giving up all of its secrets, if you like. It's still got a little bit of itself left to do something, to bring to the relation. And that really, I just made a short note. It reminds me of Merleau-Ponty, and especially the book he was writing when he died, The Visible and the Invisible. That Merleau-Ponty talks a lot about the same idea. We affect the milieu as much as the milieu affects us. And there's this that seems to be quite an important theme in that book from Merleau-Ponty, that we determine the world around us to the same extent, or only because we are also determined by the world around us. So there's this real sense of being thrown into. I mean, I don't want to overblow the Heideggerian notion of thrownness, but it's just a good word to use here. We're kind of thrust into the world. We're placed in the midst of it, rather than being at a remove, detached in some way. And I've just got a little quote here to reinforce this notion of the I, the object losing its alterity without at the same time kind of giving up everything. To be sure, in the satisfaction of need, the alienness of the world that founds me loses its alterity. In satiety, the real I sank my teeth into is assimilated. The forces that were in the other become my forces, become me, and every satisfaction of need is in some respect nourishment. Yet it remains true that this relationship differs fundamentally from the inspiration of representation. And so how is it different? How is it different from representation? Because the other, as it is brought into this totalizing relationship, still determines me in the same way that I determine it. It still has an active role. It still exerts some kind of force on me, determining me as I determine it, as I bring it into this relation of totality. And that's the difference. So it loses its alterity, but it doesn't give up all of its power, if you like. It still has the capacity to bring something to the relation. So that's intentionality. The second part of today's video, I think that this is the last part actually, the elemental. So in our sojourn in the world, I like that expression actually, sojourn. In our sojourn in the world, from where do things come to us? That's the question here. And the answer for Levinas is the elemental, what he calls the elemental. And basically it's the background or the milieu in which we find ourselves and on which things appear. Excuse me. Man, I don't know why this morning my voice is just not playing ball. So this is, the first thing he says is, this is not a system of references. It's not a referential totality, which is clear moving away from Heidegger, who this is Heidegger's idea of referential totality. Everything fits into this referential totality where things are for doing things, things are related to other objects, and everything ultimately relates back to for the sake of, which is for Dasein. This elemental, the background on which things appear and in which we carry out our sojourn in the world, is not a system of references, not a referential totality. The elemental, for Levinas, is a common fund or terrain, essentially non-possessable, nobodies. And the examples he gives are things like earth, sea, light, city. Those are some of the examples. So he's kind of describing like the background, right? The background on which your lives play out. So characteristic of the elemental is that it manifests as a pure quality that lacks a substance behind it. So one of Levinas' examples here is water. If we think about water, the liquidity of water, it's something that when we're swimming, for example, we enjoy the liquidity of water when we're swimming, but it lacks any sense for us of being liquidity of something, of being a quality of a substance which supports that quality, that liquidity. And I think the way to understand this is that, and this is another quote, he says, quality manifests itself in the element as determining nothing, as not leading back to, not referring back to a substance. Thus, thought does not fix the element as an object. And so again, the way I understand this is that when we are when we're living from qualities themselves, we're just enjoying the qualities. We're not arranging them into kind of an ontology of the universe. You know, we don't have in mind that this quality is a part of this substance, and you know, that substance is related to these other substances, or so on and so forth. There's no kind of intellectuation going on there. Intellectuation? There's no intellectual activity. There's no intellection going on. We're not rationalizing the world. We're enjoying it. We're living from. And so I think that's the sense in which he means the elemental manifests for us as a pure quality, as just that quality, nothing more. We're not doing science. You know, we're not analyzing. We're trying to capture what's original in human experience, in a human life, and to do that, we don't reason our way through life. We don't analyze our way through things. We can do that. We can analyze. We can reason, but that comes on top of a more fundamental mode of existence, which is enjoyment, living from. And in that mode, qualities lack any substance. They don't refer to a substance which supports them. They just are that substance. They just are that quality. And what's more, that quality supports us. We are immersed in it. We are, what's the expression? We posit ourselves in the midst of it. We're not reflecting on it. We're not analyzing it from a distance. We're thrust into it. So the quality, the air, the light, the sea, the sky, earth, all of these things they're not something I'm detaching myself from and analyzing and seeing as, you know, breaking apart into qualities that are aspects of these substances. I am in those qualities and they are supporting me. So there's a sense of reversal of the way we normally think of things here. And in fact, he says that it's this pure quality of the elemental, it's the reverse of reality, without origin in a being. It doesn't come from, it doesn't have its ground in a substance, in being anywhere. And in that sense, for Levinas, the elemental remains anonymous. So it has no, in a way, and we'll say this a little bit later, it comes from nowhere. It has no source for us. When we're in this fundamental mode of human existence, enjoyment, living from. And that's why he also says that it's non-possessable. It's something we can't take a hold of, because when we do take a hold of it, or we try and grasp it, it loses its sense as the elemental. It's no longer the support of our lives. It becomes something sterile, something dry, something we've distanced ourselves from. We're no longer in the midst of it. We're no longer in a sojourn anymore. We've taken ourselves out. We've removed ourselves from the picture, and we're now analysing things clinically. So it's, for Levinas, the elemental is anonymous. It's non-possessable. It's this background or milieu which manifests in these qualities that have no substance behind them, but in turn, instead, support us, support our lives. Okay, so I want to look at another facet of this that Levinas brings up, which is implements or tools. So this is kind of important because Heidegger obviously talks about objects as tools and implements. So Levinas addresses it here. He says that even implements, even actual tools, things like hammers, things that we actually use to accomplish tasks, they don't originally involve a system of reference. To enjoy without utility, in pure loss, gratuitously, without referring to anything else, in pure expenditure. This is the human. So that's quite a nice quote, right? I like that one. A short quote, but quite nice. Our original relationship to the world there is pure expenditure, just enjoyment, using things for the sake of using things. We take our pleasure in the things themselves, not as things for a purpose. So it's a very non-utilitarian way of thinking about things. Okay, cool. So even when we're using tools, for Levinas, this is still enjoyment. But then he says, he raises a possible objection here. Can we say that this is a care? Even this enjoyment itself is still a care for existence, for existing. Are we still taking care of our existence? Again, another reference to Heidegger. And his answer is no. It's not. This is not reducible to care, even a care for our own existence. And he has this to say regarding the need to eat. One of the most pressing existential needs, I guess. So one of the most readily applicable to this idea that we are caring for our existence. The inversion of the instincts of nutrition, which have lost their biological finality, marks the very disinterestedness of man. The suspension or absence of the ultimate finality has a positive face, the disinterested joy of play. To live is to play. The need for food does not have existence as its goal, but food. Okay, so regarding food, the inversion of the instincts of nutrition, we eat for pleasure now. We don't, and we've built up a whole host of norms and rules and about etiquette and things like that, and eating, sharing, having a dinner together with other people. There's a whole there are customs and traditions and so on and so forth that have all gone way beyond just eating to survive. And that marks, I like that expression, the disinterestedness of man. We're no longer, we're not utilitarian beings anymore. We're not using things for purposes, for functions. We've gone beyond that, and And when he says that this is kind of the fundamental mode of human existence, the idea is not that this was first and then we ate to live. Obviously, we ate to live first before we were even conscious, before we were fully developed the fully developed conscious beings that we are today. Obviously, we ate originally to survive, but that we weren't human beings at that point. So this is not like we can't trace this back with a scientific mindset. When Levinas says fundamental, he doesn't mean like temporally prior to. He means what it is to be a human being, which is not it's not prior to the being the kind of the animal urges that drive us. It's not prior to those in the sense that science would think of it. What predates the other, or what's a prerequisite for the other. It's that once, and what it is to be a human, once we became human beings, the conscious beings that we are, the self-aware beings that we are, that then living in the world, existing in the world, is no longer just about existing. It's no longer just about surviving. It's no longer just about utilizing tools to accomplish certain goals. There's a different mode of existence, and it's more fundamental, not in the sense that it predates those more animal, the more animal side of us, but in the sense that it's more essential to what it is to be a human being. So to live is to play as a human being. To live as a human being is to play. The need for food does not have existence as its goal for a human being, but food. We eat to eat. We eat for the food. We enjoy the food itself. Yes, of course, we survive. We have to eat to survive. But that's not what defines, that's not the essence of food for us as human beings. The essence of food for us is food itself. The food is the end. It's not a means to a goal. It is the end itself. And it's only when we see the world and objects in it in that way that that we can fully grasp human existence. And that's what Levinas's point is here. And it's quite an interesting little section. He says Heidegger has completely ignored enjoyment. And there's a nice little quote: Dasein in Heidegger is never hungry. So Dasein, Heidegger has just completely overlooked this part of our fundamental human nature, to enjoy. We live to enjoy. For him, it's everything fits into this referential totality. One thing is, the hammer is for hammering, and it's used with nails and wood, and that's ultimately to satisfy some goal, to build a house or something, for the security of Dasein. Everything fits into this network, and Levinas is directly opposing that in a really interesting way, a way that I think there's definitely merit to it. Okay, sensibility. That's the next thing I want to look at here regarding. So we're still the broader topic here is the elemental. So Levinas talks about sensibility. And sensibility is basically the way we know qualities. And I've put know in inverted commas because it's not intellectual knowing. It's not that kind of representational knowing, reducing the object to its meaning, intellectualizing, analyzing, reasoning. It's not that kind of knowledge. sensibility, sensing, using our sensory capacities. This is the way that we know we can apprehend, perceive qualities. And in other words, sensibility is capturing the way that we are in the element itself, that we are immersed in the element. So not to be understood in terms of intelligibility or representation, obviously. Rather, it's grasped then, sensibility is grasped in affectivity, feelings. So it's a mode of enjoyment. And he says that one lives sensible qualities. And he talks about the red of a sunset. This is not something that we intellectualize, we reason. Again, we can do that, but that comes later. It's a derivative mode. Originally, we enjoy, we live the color, we live the taste, we live the feel. We don't analyze them, we don't dissect them originally. And so sensibility is grasped in affectivity, which makes it a mode of enjoyment. And then he says, doesn't this mean that it's necessarily less clear and distinct than intelligibility, for example, which is obviously very, very precise, and everything fits into its place neatly and concisely and tidily. But he says, no, it's tempting to think that, but it's not less clear and distinct, because to say that would be to judge it by standards that only apply on the plane of representation. And this is quite interesting. I quite like this, because I've said it before. I remember saying something like this when I was doing the videos on Merleau-Ponty. It's this kind of amorphous, ambiguous feeling we have with the things that these philosophers talk about. And it's just a necessary part of what it is to describe human experience. Human experience isn't fixed and rational and ordered and organized, right? It's messy. There are hazy distinctions. And that's true. But Levinas is right here to say that it's less clear and distinct, to say that it's ambiguous and uncertain, is to impose standards that don't belong here. These are measurement. These are benchmarks that have no meaning, have no relevance in this field. They're only applicable on the plane of representation. They're only applicable when we are analyzing, dissecting, when we're doing science. But they mean nothing here. It means nothing to talk about clearness and distinctness. That only has meaning when you are intellectualizing, when you're representing something intellectually, when you're actually living it. That these terms mean nothing. So he says sensibility goes directly to the object and is immediately and completely satisfied. It's not that there is insensibility in grasping these qualities of the elemental. It's not that we have this feeling, I don't quite understand it. We never have that feeling. It's a little bit ambiguous, I'm not sure. We never have that feeling, because that feeling, it has no place here. We're living we're enjoying the thing. And when we do that, we go straight to the object. There is no ambiguity. We know what the object is. We enjoy it. To even say that, I don't fully understand it, or it's indistinct in some way, is to conflate living from and representation. I quite like that. That's a nice way of thinking about this. So he goes on. I've got a quote. He talks about this sensibility being different from reason, and my quote sounds like this: The earth which upholds me does so without my troubling myself about knowing what upholds the earth. I am content with the aspect, this corner of the world, universe of my daily behaviour, this city or this neighbourhood or this street in which I move, this horizon within which I live, turn to me. I do not ground them in a more vast system. It is they that ground me. I welcome them without thinking them. I enjoy this world of things as pure elements, as qualities without support, without substance. So different from reason, in reasoning, we look to understand everything. We try and put everything into categories. We taxonomize. We try and make our, qualities belong to the substance, and the substance belongs to. This is kind of, in one sense, it's what ontology is, and I think it's why Heidegger later in his later works moved away from the word ontology as well, because it has that sense. It's being connected to reason and analysing the world, reflecting on the world. But for Levinas, as he says here, the earth upholds me without me wondering what upholds the earth. That's a derivative form of engagement with the earth. My original mode of engagement with the earth is as a support. It supports me. and everything flows from there. There is nothing else to be. There are no other unanswered questions here. The unanswered questions come up through reason, and there's nothing wrong with those. There's nothing bad about that. About doing science, about trying to understand the greater picture here. But that is a derivative mode of existence. Enjoyment, living from, that's our original fundamental mode. I'm content with this corner of the world. The city, the neighborhood, everything turns to me, and I don't feel the need to ground them in something else, because they ground me. They are the support for me. I don't need to look for a deeper support. I welcome them, I enjoy them without thinking them. So that's nice. Sensibility then is prior to reason and intellect. It's more original. Not in that sense that I talked about before, like the way the scientist would think of it. So that doesn't predate reasoning or analysis, that reflective mode, but it's prior to the reason and the intellect, in the sense that it's more essential to be, I'm not explaining this well, I think. It goes to the core, the essence of what it is to be a human being. In that sense, it's more original than reason and the intellect. So this is not against, I've kind of already said this actually, it's not against intelligibility. The element refers to an infinity beyond it. This is a good quote actually. In the eyes of reason, the contentment of sensibility is ridiculous. But sensibility is not a blind reason and folly. So if this would be perhaps the rationalist, materialist critique of someone like Levinas. It looks ridiculous. The contentment you say that you enjoy, you live from without worrying, without wondering about how all of these things, what upholds the earth. It seems ridiculous. But it's not a blind reason and folly, because it's not reason at all. It's prior to reason. It's deeper than reason. It's more original to the way that we live. It's a different mode of knowing, which is to say, it's not knowing, but it's living. It's enjoying, and that's the main idea that section, sensibility, just kind of distinguishing it from a usual mode of knowing, which is intellectual, reflective, reasoning. Okay, the final part I want to look at, still under this broader topic of the elemental, is the mythical. Okay, so let's look at the mythical. In the elemental, we've already talked about the way that qualities lack substance. They come to us from nowhere, as it were, and without us being able to possess their source. So this, Levinas says, constitutes an insecurity. There's a fundamental insecurity here behind our enjoyment. These things continue coming. Their qualities continue to manifest for us, but they're emerging, arising from nowhere. And that leads to this feeling of insecurity. This continual coming, this continual appearance, manifestation of these qualities links us to the temporal. It invokes the temporal in the sense of the future. So the future then of sensibility and enjoyment is connected to these qualities which continue to appear out of nowhere, which is insecurity. So the future of sensibility and enjoyment is fundamentally, or has a tinge of insecurity to it. And bringing these together gives us the mythical. To be affected by a side, face of being, while its whole depth remains undetermined and comes upon me from nowhere, is to be bent toward the insecurity of the morrow. The future of the element as insecurity is lived concretely as the mythical divinity of the element. Faceless gods, impersonal gods to whom one does not speak, marks the nothingness that bounds the egoism of enjoyment in the midst of its familiarity with the element. Hence the mythical. There's this sense that on the horizon of the element there's something that we don't have access to. We can't see. It's unpossessable fundamentally. Comes to us from nowhere, these qualities. So there's an existing without a revealing of itself. And he says an existence without existent. So there's an existence, there is something there, but it doesn't manifest in any way. There's no concrete anything that we can talk about. Faceless gods, impersonal gods, kind of on the edge of, on the horizon of the element. Okay, so yeah, so that's good. I think that's why this is the mythical. So it was interesting. He brings in the idea of gods here, faceless gods, impersonal gods. I was a little bit unsure of this at first, but the more I think about it, the more it seems okay, because this is the way, I think, this connects in nicely with the way that primitive cultures have always worshipped the elements, right? And they worship them precisely because there is nothing there to grasp a hold of. The element is a manifestation of something which we don't know, which we don't see, which doesn't appear for us. Hence, it gets taken up as part of a religion. So that's kind of cool. He calls this whole thing paganism, though, as well. A little bit ambivalent about that one, because that kind of sets up the distinction as if, well, this is paganism, and it's just setting up the opposite, right, which is kind of true religion, if you like, or the real of Judaism or something, which is going to come later. But again, in the sense that, well, the pagan religions did worship the elements. Yeah, he's right. But again, I don't like the direction he's pushing this, as if that was, there's another side which is going to come later, which is in opposition to paganism, which is true religion, if you like. So whatever, that's there anyway. He calls it a paganism, but he says it's a paganism which must be risked, because it's only through this that we can get to separation, i.e. through enjoyment. So this is quite interesting, because again, there's this idea that there's something which seems to be untrue or not correct, but it's something that has to be there because it's a part of separation. It's what it is to have this separation. We talked about this with atheism, right? Atheism or separation as atheism, but it's built into what it is to be a human being. We have to be separate. We have to separate from existence itself. We have to be separate from the world in order for there to be a world in the first place. So that separation, it seems like a negative, but in actual fact, without it, there's nothing anyway. So it's this kind of negative which is built into the positive, if you like, of human existence. Same thing here. There's this paganism which is kind of like a negative thing, this worshipping of these impersonal gods, these faceless gods that lurk behind the qualities, the elements. It is there, and it has to. We have to have that, because that's what it is to be separate. In order to be a separate entity, in order to be the I that I am, in order to exist as a human being, there has to be that limit, the source of the qualities, the source of the elemental must be unknowable to me, which is this kind of paganism, what he's calling paganism here. We don't have to worship them, of course. We don't have to worship the sources as gods, but that sense that there is this something missing from the picture, this insecurity gnawing away at us, we have to have that. We have to go through that in order to be separate beings. So just kind of interesting, another example of that. It's putting it a little bit bluntly, perhaps, but that negative within the positive. Sartre's bad faith was the same kind of thing. Heidegger's inauthenticity, the falling prey, all the same kind of thing. These are things that we normally think of as bad or to be avoided, or we try and avoid them, overcome them, but we can't, because they're a fundamental part of the human condition. Okay, a couple of other things I want to note regarding that quote. Nothingness. It was interesting to see Levinas talk about nothingness here as the support of qualities, that support that is not a substance. So it's always interesting to me to see how people interpret nothingness, what they have to say about this. I wrote an article a little while ago about nothingness from 4 different perspectives: Bergson, Sartre, Heidegger, and Buddhism. and just the way that they approach nothingness, what nothingness means for them. And so this is, nothingness kind of works its way into Levinas's philosophy as well, here as I don't want to say invisible, well, yeah, invisible. And it's a nice link to Merleau-Ponty, the invisible support of qualities. What it's invisible because, and we have to be careful because this is not necessarily, but it has the potential to become just nonsense, right? Just mysticism, or the divine. It's God. That's where God is, right? This nothingness. But I don't think we want to go that far. It's nothing in the sense that when we live from, when we enjoy the thing, we're experiencing just the quality itself. We're enjoying the quality, and that the kind of behind it, the support for it, is of no concern to us. And it's in that sense that Levinas is talking about a nothingness here. Well, that's how I interpret him anyway. He's talking about nothingness. It's not some magical something, although he does kind of push it in that direction a little bit when he talks about the nothingness as ultimately being the there is, existence itself, pure existence. And he says the element extends into the there is. I'm still a little bit not sure where I stand on the notion of this there is, existence itself. Levinas talks about it. I'm not sure that there is actually anything there to talk about. And I don't just mean in the sense that this is the unknowable mystery, because then again, for me, that's drifting too far into this rampant speculation. There's some magical something out there, we just don't know what it is. I'm not a big fan of that way of thinking, because it just lends itself to nonsense, really, to mystical nonsense and superstitious ideas that I don't think have any place in good philosophy. But yeah, so he's pushing this nothingness into his there is. I think I'm just going to leave it there. I'm not going to say anything more about it. I'm still undecided on what I think of his there is anyway. It's interesting, but yeah, I think you can read his nothingness here as in a kind of, what can I say? in a reasonable, philosophically legitimate way, and also as tending towards a kind of illegitimate, mystical, pseudo-religious way as well. I'll leave this discussion of the mythical with one last point. The insecurity that we've found here behind the element is not absurd, though, for Levinas. And nor does it mean that we are thrown into the element. So it doesn't have this, it's not like capricious, we're abandoned in the element, cast adrift, kind of in a meaningless world. The insecurity that we've found is not that strong. It doesn't overwhelm the enjoyment that is central for Levinas. So he says insecurity menaces an enjoyment already happy in the element. So like I've been saying, the insecurity is more like it's a tinge to the element. It doesn't undermine it. It doesn't undermine our enjoyment. Okay. Well, that took a couple of takes to film. And there was a lot of a lot of rambling that I'm editing out from that. So count yourself lucky that I've edited out that much, but there's probably still too much rambling in there anyway. But let's call it there and look at a summary. So intentionality was what we started with. We looked at representation, the intentionality of representation, which was Husserl. And in this, we saw that we were reducing the object to its meaning, and this reduced it to the same. So it forced the object to relinquish all of its alterity, and it just had nothing left. It just referred to us. It brought nothing to the relation itself. The other form of intentionality was enjoyment, and this is Levinas's obviously, where the exteriority is preserved, we just take hold of it. And this is living from. And the big thing here was that the same determines the other while being determined by it. So the other, the object, the world, has an active role to play. It determines me in the same way that I determine it, or at the same time that I determine it. Then we looked at the elemental, and this is basically a common fund or terrain, a milieu. But an important point here was that this is a quality, manifest as a quality without a substance. We enjoy the element, the qualities of the elements, without any concern, without any knowledge of, without any even awareness of a support for those qualities. Within this, we looked at implements or tools, and Levinas was clear these are not a system of references. They're not parts of a system of references. Rather, implements were, even though they're implements, even though they're tools which we use for things, they are pure expenditure. They are enjoyment, first and foremost. And that nice quote there against Heidegger, Dasein is never hungry. Then we looked at sensibility, which is the way that we know qualities, and this means it's through affectivity, not through reason, not through the intellect. We live the elements, the qualities, or we live from, perhaps, to be more Levinas about it. And this was prior to intelligibility. So prior to intelligibility, not against intelligibility. And prior to, not in the sense that it, in a kind of scientific sense, predates intelligibility, but it is more fundamental to what it is to be a human being. And finally, we looked at the mythical. So this arises from the way that the qualities come from nowhere. They come from a source which is invisible and unpossessable, something that remains anonymous. And we called this a futural insecurity. And this was an insecurity that doesn't undermine the enjoyment, but is more tinges the enjoyment. It menaces an enjoyment that's already happy. And that is the end of this section. That was really hard to film, man. I went through, I've got like 7 different little segments I have to piece together now. And there was lots of consternation as I was going through this, especially towards the end. Hopefully that I've managed to get something that is semi-coherent. And thanks for watching. Thanks for sticking with me through this one. And I'll see you in the next one. I'm out. See ya.